Hey everyone, I just recently did a podcast with Jay, or as you might know him, TheNo.1Spot, from KSM.com. In our podcast, we just had a general conversation about drum and bass. Um, so this is the video here, and if you like anything that we've talked about, then please do have a look at what Jay has written on KSM.com with TheNo.1Spot. And thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Alex, and here I have Jay with me. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about drum and bass as a topic in general. So I suppose I'll just my first question for you, Jay, is maybe if for those of you not familiar with Jay, would you like to introduce yourself a bit, just like a bit of yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Jay. I'm based in New Malden. Um, Alex and I first got to know each other, funnily enough, I believe it was in first year. We had a mentoring session with
Yeah.
some older students, and funnily enough, we've just sort of been in classes ever since. Um, I'm originally a kind of performer, a vocalist, but as I've kind of gone through uni, it's kind of morphed more into a bit more of kind of songwriting, a bit more academic and stuff. And yeah,
Stuff.
just excited for the end of uni and real life, I
I
suppose.
know, right? It feels like it's been such a just a long hellhole of of things.
Yeah, and especially this last year has been just something else, like something we could never have foreseen.
So I suppose my first question for you is what actually got you into the drum and bass genre? Do you actually have a particular moment where the first time you were exposed to the genre, or like a particular event that made you think, "Whoa, this is something I've never heard before. This is amazing." Or yeah.
So, funnily enough, I actually wrote about this in one of the articles, and I mentioned kind of the first sort of time, and I think without kind of realizing it was drum and bass, I kind of said in it. The first kind of, I remember the first song that I remember listening to and being like, "Oh, this is cool." And I remember me and my brother used to listen to it was Slam by Pendulum. And I remember me and my brother used to watch the music video as well, because it's just this video of kind of this really kind of overweight guy like dancing in the street or something. It's just like ridiculous, but it was just brilliant. Um, but then more recently, I'd probably say the thing that first properly got me into it was probably the first drum and bass event I saw a lot. Well, not event necessarily, but kind of concert when I went to Reading Festival and I saw Rebel Sound, which is like a group of you got MC Rage, David Rodigan, and Chase and Status. And actually, I had seen Chase and Status before that, but I wasn't too crazy into drum and bass then. But just before this event, I had actually sort of properly got into it. So seeing it and kind of being in that kind of setting for the first time and being in the crowd and like actually kind of knowing what drum and bass was sort of about and what sort of things you not necessarily that you want to listen out for, but kind of because yeah, it's just a lot of dots were connected on that day. And I was with one of my friends who I've kind of grown up with, who also kind of really helped me get into drum and bass. And we were just like, oh my God, like this is just wow.
Especially like you mentioned Pendulum, and it's just like I can't believe they've been gone for so long, and then they just suddenly come back with two different singles. I think it was Driver and Nothing for Free, or something like that recently, and then they disappeared again. I'm not sure, but hopefully they come back as a group soon again, or and make more music again.
Mm.
That'd be quite nice
And
for them. And also if they keep doing
yeah,
more
because I think
festivals.
I've seen a lineup in this, I think maybe just on the weekend before my birthday this year, they're on a pendulum. I can't, it's like pendulum trio or something like that. And they're on a
Yeah.
bill with like Hybrid Minds and a few other people and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so you mentioned going to festivals and like Rebel Case and Pendulum and have you ever tried to make drum and bass music yourself in so far in your life, or is it just you're part of the culture, or you also like do you incorporate some of that into your songwriting, into your singing, for example, or
I definitely, yeah, I have tried. Um, it hasn't kind of worked amazingly. Um, but I guess, that's just because it's kind of the first few attempts, and I think just the way that my songwriting is, I'm not kind of geared towards that sort of thing. Um, um, because as weird as it sounds, I guess I kind of like to overcomplicate. And not saying that drum and bass isn't complicated or complex, but it kind of has a formula in a way. And I tend to diverge. Even when I've tried to make kind of drum and bass songs, it has ended up. And I've like shouted it to my brother before, and he'd be like I get it, but like I'm not just going to drop this in the middle of a set, like. But yeah, I think in terms of taking aspects from it, that is, it's definitely something in terms of because I am a vocalist. Obviously, I do quite like to pay big attention to MCs and kind of their rapping or whatever you want to call it. And I've certainly tried to kind of involve some of that in just my music, and also generally just because originally I was a drummer, so kind of rhythm is very big for me anyway, and definitely some stuff in drum and bass in terms of, well, not even anything specific, but it is very kind of rhythm heavy, obviously, and that's something that I always have at the core of my music.
I think it's like even without making drum and bass directly, like there's always I think even like our other colleagues like Ronnie and Sophie, and we all take influence from each other, from different genres of music, and there's always subtle influences of drum and bass and ballads, and like contrasting different a contrast of different genres are always somewhat subtly inspired by it. And I think that does provide some kind of new opportunities for new music to be formed. Yeah, we should definitely try collaborating
Yeah, that
in the
would.
future
Mm.
with maybe get your vocals and songwriting into. Maybe we can try out drum and bass again in the future and see like if you want to run along with that, or something like that, and we can get Ronnie and Sophie or something, and then Dan somehow in a kind of genre frenzy, just combine different genres together.
Amalgamation of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
So have you sort of kind of got had a proper go at drum and bass and stuff? Because I know you're a lot more techie than I am, and
I've had a few goes at it, but my first one was back in college, in Isha College, and it was very bland, and it's still bland right now. I've had a couple more attempts at it, and it gets more complicated in the sense that I would say mostly in a good way, because the first one was really, it had no it was just really static, and then along the way it just got more dynamic, and it wasn't just always loud all the time. It was just like I had better I had improved on my arrangements, so it just kind of makes more sonically and musically. I think I'm getting there, but it's I have the kind of the same thing. It's like I like with your brother. He says I get it, but it's just, yeah, I need a couple more goes of it. Yeah. So in your post, I think you did mention a few different genres like neurofunk, but what kinds of drum and bass genres do you usually listen to when you get into that drum and bass world? Are there any that you prefer over others? So like I don't know, liquid or neurofunk or drum step or whichever genres you into that kind of.
So the one that I probably listen to most is kind of liquid and sort of like rollers. Um, just purely because I guess I should say that kind of when I sort of had a drum and bass renaissance or whatever you want to call it, in terms of when I actually properly got into it, my friend Matt, who I saw Rebel Sound with, and then also my brother, were the people that kind of got me into it. And at first, we kind of only listened to Jump Up, which is sort of like, okay, it was good at the time, and it is very every so often it's all right now, but now it's more just kind of I guess I just appreciate the liquid a lot more for some reason. And then after that, it's probably jungle. I'm really into the jungle, obviously, being a very rhythm guy and having been a drummer, all those kind of breaks and drum patterns and stuff is very right up my street.
I kind of I like some of the liquid stuff too. Like there's an artist called Feint, Feint, but he used to make liquid genres, and now he just makes kind of more mainstream genres, if you like. But if you go back on his history, like it is so much different to what he produced in the past. It was like it was liquid drum and bass, but it was really relaxing to listen to, and that's just amazing how even in one genre, just drum and bass and no touching nothing else, like your sound can develop
Mm.
really significantly. I think it's crazy what happens over a
Oh
decade.
yeah. What sort of stuff do you listen to?
I in terms of drum and bass, it's mainly like drum step. I listen to a guy called Protestar. He just has a neo funk, gritty sound to his music. It's quite modern, and old school at the same time, but it feels like it feels quite nostalgic and quite new all at once, which I think can sometimes be difficult to for an artist to pull off properly. But I think he does that kind of quite well, I would say. Another one is Grabbits. He incorporates a few other genres because he's a songwriter as
Mm.
well, and he before he did drum bass, drum step, and trap, all those genres. He was a rapper, and he just has he always had a soft acoustic side to him, and then he just uh, expanded a bit more, which is always nice to see. Um, a few other guys, like Mutzi, for example, Muzzzy or Muzz, he had to change his name because of a lawsuit with the BBC because his name resembled the little toy in the commercial. Mutzi, do you remember the green monster? Do you remember
Oh
that?
no.
But basically, he just resembled the name resembled the toy, I think, that was broadcasted on the BBC. So he had to change his name. But basically, I quite like his orchestral and rock influences
Mm.
into drum and bass. I feel like people are. I think like drum and bass is great for what it is. I love having this stereotypical like in your face kind of approach to the style, but I also enjoyed the mixture of like how I also like a very long build up. So
Mm.
it starts off quite quietly, and then oh my goodness, it is suddenly it's proper. This makes you go, wow, this is drum and bass at its
Very
purity.
atmospheric sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's I think that can really be refreshing. Like you get the best of different worlds. It's amazing. So I guess we kind of touched on this already. We talked about some artists that um, already, but is there like one in particular that's always stuck with you for your life, or artists that drive your passion of drum and bass, or like artists that influenced you in your songwriting, for example, or somewhat like that? Um,
I'd say someone who's always been in my tastes, no matter what, and funnily enough, has sort of got a bit of everything that I like, is Shy FX. I'm a very big fan of his. Obviously with his jungle roots, and then kind of moving on. And one of his bigger songs more recently, something that I'm just like, it's just ever since I heard it, I've been obsessed with, and so many of my friends have been as well, is Roll the Dice, which he did which has a feature with Lily Allen, who's been someone that I really respect, and I've read her book, and like I really like her songwriting and stuff. And it's not exactly that he's kind of influenced my songwriting necessarily. It's just like I say, he was at get those on properly. I forgot to say he was in Rebel Sound as well. So I've seen him a few times, and he's just the most consistent when he's live. All of his music is just like, he seems, I guess the way that he has influenced me is in a sense of he's been around since like the 90s, and he's still relevant to this day. And I guess there are a handful of drum and bass artists that are, but for me, he's probably the one that resonates with me the most, because he is just so kind of versatile in a way. And I guess that's sort of what I want to aim for as well, that kind of being able to shift in and out and keep with the times, I suppose.
Exactly. I feel like when you're around for long enough, if you're an artist that continues to make music for the rest of your life, like it has, it's I mentioned this ages ago, but I feel like you fall in love with the process. Like if you love something so much, you will keep doing it. So if you're an artist that rarely puts anything out, it's like, come on, please just put more stuff out. People will eventually. There's artists that there's like artists that probably feel like they have leeches on their back because of how much they get given to the audience over time, and like you say, versatility, and like just dropping in and out of just in different ways, and helps it just helps establish that connection with the audience. You've been around for some time and you're still making music for us. You haven't forgotten about us, because I feel like there's so many artists that just they make a few songs and they disappear. Everyone forgets about them. So I think it's a really good point that you made there. So I guess that kind of as I suppose we touched this about as well, the idea of drum and bass being morphed or combined of other genres like pop or orchestral music. I guess what do you reckon about that? Like when you're listening out for, I guess jungle has a few influences from like genres like breaks, for example, because you have the drum patterns and stuff that kind of it just kind of feels more organic when you have like, especially with samples of real life samples from in the past. I think especially with dub and reggae, like all those influences that come into play with jungle and jump up and anything else with any other genres and drum and bass, it really has kind of just adds more that layer to drum and bass. What do you reckon about that?
I think it's an awesome thing. There's always I think there's, in any kind of music, kind of regardless, there's always space for creating new things and pushing boundaries. And I think, I don't know why it's kind of popped up, but there's a Frank Zappa quote that I really like, and it's like, a mind is like a parachute, it only works if it's open. And it's sort of I kind of like to think like that with, well, I mean, it obviously isn't in regard to music because he was a musician, but I love the application of that in music, because it is so like, music is such a like, okay, yeah, there's only so many chords, there's only so many notes, so there's only a finite amount of combinations, but it's kind of like being able to present them in different ways, and it's being able to view things from a different perspective that I think creates that like really awesome space to create new things. Because like I'm all for kind of mashing drum and bass up with stuff. Like I'm a really huge Beatles fan, and like I love finding like random SoundCloud like things of just like a Beatles song that's been like remixed into a drum and bass song. And it's like, this is like kind of super cheesy, but it's also really cool. But yeah, I think, and actually the whole drum and bass and orchestral thing, that's quite a very interesting one, because obviously they're kind of completely different worlds. But that's like it works so well because a lot of kind of the more atmospheric and ambient drum and bass songs will kind of use like synth strings anyway, getting the real thing and kind of putting that in a space like I'm sure it has happened and will keep happening in like proper music halls, is something that is just like, that's like so interesting to me. It's just that kind of merging of two worlds, which is just, I always find really, really fascinating.
I think it just every time like there's always going to be critics out there who are like, oh, this genre is combined with this genre, like, but I think like people can get surprised that there's still even in like 10-20 years time, when the same genres keep being combined, people will still be like shocked by what outcomes you can get. Because like you say, drum and bass already has kind of like synthetic strings, synth strings on it, so it makes kind of sense when you combine those genres together. It just you get the best of beauty and the best of grittiness, if that makes sense. Like you get two different sounds, and you're forming something completely new. And the same with like metal and drum and bass, for example. I think that makes just as much sense, because you're just like guitars, electric guitars, and drum and bass is like, it feels like a no-brainer at this point. I feel like artists are really grinding more and on like, they're just finding it so much easier to make music when they take aspects from different genres. Like it helps really get rid of that writer's block, because you're not so close-minded. It isn't a closed parachute. It's an open parachute.
It's funny that you mentioned the metal and the drum and bass as well, because funnily enough, and it's kind of not completely related, but funny enough, my brother, so he DJs, and like he's nothing big or anything, but he's working on it, and he like lives and breathes drum and bass, and he doesn't listen to anything else, and he wakes up and he puts it on. He has it on when he's at work, if he can. That's what he listens to when he's walking to the shops, like all the time. And before that, the only other genre of music that he really listened to before he got into drum and bass was metal, which is kind of like, as much as you're like, oh, that's such a big jump, you can't, in a lot of ways, you're sort of like, if you think about the actual musical elements, it's like, is it though? Like, so it is kind of just funny that you've mentioned that kind of opportunity for fusing them together, because it's certainly, in the right setting, I'm sure it would actually be a really good thing.
Yeah, I feel like people don't realize like how significant, just thinking of just how significant this is. I feel like just in the next 5-10 years that there's going to be a grey area of like, what genre is this? I don't know anymore. But it mostly feels great. I just I feel like it's just always anything that challenges the human brain is just like amazing. I can't really put that into words, but it's crazy. So when the situation calms down, are you thinking of going into any events like Pendulum and Chasing Minds, and any any of those, or maybe alternatively any online events that you've been looking at. So because I know, for example, this isn't related to drum and bass, but there's a record label called Disciple. They had so it's a dubstep label, but they had a Minecraft event.
I think I saw something about that online.
They had like 3,000 or 4,000 players on a server. I didn't think that was possible. You could put so many players on the server like that in Minecraft, but they had multiple artists and everyone was just jamming with their blocky characters. It's crazy. But what do you think about that stuff? Do you have any online or real life events that you're looking forward to after, quote unquote, after the pandemic ends?
Nothing online, although I think I probably would like to try something online, because I've watched a couple plays over lockdown, which have actually been a lot kind of, I don't want to say better because they were good anyway, but it just kind of like, in terms of how they were portrayed, they were still, it didn't really detract from it at all. But yeah, I haven't got anything online booked, but that's something I would like to try. But I do have a couple raves booked. There's one which is a return to dance one, which is a Chase and Status top of the bill. I think it's one of their events. And there's a very wide variety. Actually, let me see if I can quickly. And while I get that up, I am also going to in November Printworks Kings of the Rollers Royal Rumble, which is like they're like liquid rollers, sort of maybe jump up, maybe a bit of everything kind of mashed together there. That's like so yeah, you got all sorts of people at this return to dance one, like Chase and Status, Andy C, Subfocus, like High Contrast, all the way down to people like Magistrate and Logan D and K Motions. So you got all sorts of kind of more mainstream stuff, to rollers, to jump up, to a bit of jungle and stuff. It's going to be amazing.
Nice.
And I'm always on the lookout as well. What about you? Have you got anything?
I don't really I'm not really the sort of guy that goes to festivals that much or anything. I just like to listen from home to I've only been to a few. I can't remember the last time I've been to a festival, but it's just I just enjoy it for the music itself. I feel like although that can sound contradicting, because at the live setting it feels can be usually a better experience, I suppose. But I feel like yeah, I really just I'm more of like an observer of what's what events are just happening.
It's all about that perspective. Like, yeah, it's all about having different people having their sort of way of appreciating it. Because like I know when I go to live shows, people definitely aren't thinking the same way that I do, because I'll kind of watch it and I'll kind of, if there's an MC, I'll like actually watch them and see what they're doing and like see how they're holding their mic, what are they doing on stage. Like it's that weird, like, and I'll be also kind of listening out like, okay, is the sound guy doing okay? Like I'll actually, rather than just sort of like, oh yeah, this is music, I'm dancing, like drinking, cool. I always have that sort of thought in the back of my mind, and I'm sure like all people who do music have it when they go and see music. I guess that extra just sort of aspect, because I think, because my background is in performing, I think just having that ability, that kind of opportunity to appreciate that and think about it, is something that I just value a lot. And like yeah, that I just really, really look forward to.
I think, yeah, because we're it's like it's such an overlooked aspect, and I think that's a really good thing, because you don't want your audience to worry about that stuff at all, because it's like it's the audience, and they should just focus on the music. But as artists, like that's such an interesting point for us, and it's like what microphone are they using, what setup do we have on stage, and I feel like it's a really good thing that the audience is just there to enjoy it, and they don't get bombarded with all of this all the stress that us goes to having to setting up or booking venues to perform in. I feel like that's quite a good thing, but it's not as openly discussed as it could be. It's like low key kind of. It's just I think we've covered quite a lot of topics here. Is there anything that you would like to add? Because I feel like I've asked you quite. It feels as if. Or is there anything you would like to ask me, or of anything else?
Let me have a little think. I think I did have a couple of things. Kind of a more kind of kind of more fun. Not that your questions weren't fun, but kind of less serious questions. Yeah. In terms of if you had an artist, if you had someone who was looking to get into drum and bass, what artists would you recommend them?
Oh, that's a good question.
And not just in terms of your personal bias, but who do you think is a good person to?
Oh, just trying to think. I feel like because they're not the first person that come into mind, I would say Grabbits because he's not drum and bass focused, and I feel like I could really just give a really. I feel like this would be a cheap answer, and I could just say Pendulum or something like that, because many people would rightfully say them, but I feel like I would introduce them to one of the more underground artists like Grabbits, or even artists like Righton, so Righten. So artists like them that have kind of a more alternative sounding drum and bass, if that makes sense. Yeah, I would say either Righton or I would say Akira Complex has produced a couple of drum and bass tunes, so that's exactly why I'm recommending them, because that's not the only genre that they do. Like, they can get an exposure to a few other genres from the same artists. So either Russian or Grabbits, I would say, have kind of a more alternative sound that can then help them to that can help then expand and help them introduce to more mainstream or even more underground artists that no one has heard. So yeah, what about you? What about yourself? What's the one artist, just or two artists that you would give to someone?
So it might be more of a how you said yours. You wanted to kind of go for a more underground one. Mine might be a bit more of a cop out answer in a way, but I'd probably say Chase and Status. And as much as I do like their music, they're not my kind of favorite artists, but I think because they do have such a, I guess the point is kind of similar to yours, but it's kind of more focused just in drum and bass, because they do have kind of quite a lot of different angles that they've approached it, because they certainly have like for example, when I will see them in August, they've got MC Rage with them. He's like a proper like drum and bass MC. It'll probably be more like jungly, like kind of roller music or stuff like that, whereas they've done a lot of almost more mainstream, kind of very vocal heavy sort of stuff. And I think, and to be fair, they are quite fairly well known, and it'd be quite surprising if someone hadn't at least heard of them. just because I know they've had a few songs in the charts, I'm pretty sure, and they've had various songs in like I know they had a few songs in like FIFA one year and different games, and they're kind of here and there like step. But then also I do quite like your sort of approach to it of actually kind of really showing them kind of more underground and showing them kind of what it is really about.
Yeah.
But then also having that like integration of other stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like even in that respect, you can't just go deep under and ignore all the really big artists. You can't just do the vice versa. Like just
exactly,
really look everywhere that you can, but you have easy, quote unquote, easy access to. Anyhow, whether you're paying or not paying or streaming or whatever your way of listening is. I feel like I feel like we had a really good conversation.
Yeah, it's a nice little chat, eh? I was thinking, should we maybe, for the listeners' benefit, and I guess our own as well, we could shoot a couple messages over to each other, and maybe you or me, I don't know if you do, but I have Spotify Premium. We could maybe put like a playlist together.
Maybe I think so.
Songs and stuff.
I'm not sure exactly how to do that. Is that
oh yeah, I can easily do that. Yeah. If you just send me over a load of songs, and I'll just pop it all into a playlist. And
nice. I will do that sometime today. Go to ksem.com to find out more about what Jay goes into more detail about some of the stuff we talked about in the podcast. So like the artists mentioned, like high contrast, chasing status, and the different genres that we've brushed over in this podcast. There's more information on Jay's post about drum and bass on ksm.com. So if you are interested in that, please do have a look at that. Jay, and as Jay has mentioned, he will make a playlist of different drum and bass songs,
which I think we might be able to pop online on the website. I think we can do one of those little like cutouts of like things or like that. I'm pretty sure we can work that in there somewhere, or there'll be a link or something. We'll make it nice and easy.
Nice. Well, again, thank you very much, guys, for watching. And I hope, Jay, you have a good day, and have a good day at work.
You too, man.
Thank you. Have a very good one.
Speak to you soon, man. Thank you, guys.
See you soon.